Got a little break in the weather today. It's been just deluging for a couple weeks now. We had cold weather and then the snow and then it warmed up and it's just been blowing and raining. Get a half an inch to an inch every day. Anyway, we got a little break today. Actually, we had a break on Sunday. It warmed up to about 38 degrees and it quit raining for a little while. But we took a chance and went out and I cut up a couple of little hemlock trees that I've been looking at, or cut down a couple little hemlock trees that I've been looking at. They were on a road that we could get access to, that I've been walking the dogs on. It wasn't all iced over and everything. And one of the little trees was pretty good. The other one we wound up leaving. It was rotten. It kind of blew up when it hit the road. And I knew it was rotten once I cut into it, but I don't like leaving them once you start cutting into them, as they could blow down any time or fall down any time, and it would have fallen right across the road. And just my luck, it'd fall down when I was going across it. But anyway, I've seen guys that put undercuts in trees and then just leave them. But we did get one little tree, and we got a pretty nice rick of wood there. Heck of a lot better than what I had before. So anyway, I had a little break today. It's actually 40 degrees yesterday, and it's 42 or 43 degrees today. Well, I decided to come out and put the guide rollers on this sawmill so it'd get it ready. And I had to get the mill started up, warmed up, as it's got a hydraulic tension on the blade. So I had to loosen the tension, and then I had to be able to tighten it up once I put a blade on. And I put a blade on so I'd have something to reference those rollers to. And then I brought the rollers out and put those on. I've got the lower roller on this, would be the right side, I guess, depending on which way you're looking. That one's on there and mounted up. This upper roller, I'm going to have to do something with it because it sticks out there too far. And you got to have these rollers. Let's see if I can get in here. Want to have these rollers so they're back behind the gullets so they don't interfere with the teeth. And then when you put pressure on this, when it goes in the log, that pushes that blade back a little bit. So you want to make sure they're back behind the gullets. And this lower one here is fine. I've got it adjusted, and I've got the two over on the other side set up, and they're fine. They're adjusted right. There they are over there. They turned out real good. Got those adjusted right. But this one here, and I've tried it in a couple different positions, and it just sticks out too far. So I must not have got that machined back far enough on that shank. So I've got to do something with it to get it back, to get it in there. And I thought this guide block, or this bar that it fits in, I thought it had an adjustment to go back and forth. I thought that the bolt that mounts onto was slotted, but it's not. I loosened that bolt up and I couldn't get it to move back and forth. So I'm going to have to take the roller up to the shop and either thread this back farther or thin that check nut up or something, but it's got to go back at least a half an inch. Clear those gullets on that. Now the other ones are set up pretty good, and the way I want these set up, I use that eccentric on there so that I just set those rollers up so they just don't contact that blade. So I can roll that blade around and it doesn't quite contact it, but the slightest amount of downward pressure on that will go on that lower guide. Slight upward pressure will go on that upper guide. And so I've got that one set up, and I've got those two over there set up. Now they've got a little bit of extra adjustment on them, a coarse adjustment you might say. There's two bars there that those rollers bolt into. They're an angle, cut off piece of angle. The short angle the roller's bolted into, and then the long angle goes back, and they've got a bolt through it that goes through a block there mounted onto the carriage. And then there's a bolt that sticks down through a flange on the back that contacts the back of that angle piece, that arm. And you can adjust that arm up or down for a coarse adjustment. And then you use the eccentric on the mounting bolts to adjust the fine adjustment on them. Now I think I'm going to do something else too. You can see here, there's a roller here in the back. That one I probably should change anyway. It's getting a little stiff. I thought it was pretty good, but sitting here it's gotten a little stiff. But it's back almost 1/4 of an inch from the back of this blade, and I don't want it riding on that blade when the blade is operating normally, but that's quite a ways back there, and it has pushed back and got a groove in that. And again, there's no way to adjust that. I thought there was a slot in this bracket here that I could slide that forward, but there's not. So I've got two choices on that. I can either drill and thread a new hole that this bearing mounts up into, or I can turn a sleeve to put over that bearing to make it just a little bit larger in diameter. And I think that's what I'll do. I'll get a new bearing and I'll make a sleeve for it to press into. So that gives me a little bit more work to do on this bandsaw mill. And while I got it running, I got to looking in there, got to noticing, and those belts are coming apart. So I'm going to have to get new belts too. There's two belts on that run to drive the mill, and then there's one belt that comes over and drives a hydraulic pump. And I might as well change all three of them while I'm at it. Started putting these guide rollers on the Mighty Mite bandsaw mill, and I got 3 of them went on there just fine, but the 4th one stuck out too far. You got to have the guide rollers back in behind the gullet of the tooth, and this one was sticking out to where actually the tooth would have ridden on it, which wouldn't be good at all. I swapped them around, seeing if I could get them to fit, one of them maybe to fit in that hole or anything, but they're all so close in size that they still wouldn't fit in that one. I thought there was some adjustment on that, on the stick out on the bracket that holds them. I loosened it up to see if I could get it to go back. It has a hole in it where it has a 1/2 inch bolt that holds it onto the frame of the mill, but that was just a hole. It's just a pivot point. It does adjust up and down to give me a gross adjustment of the height of the roller, and then you use the fine adjustment with the offset here, the eccentric on this bolt, but it didn't adjust in and out any, so that didn't work. So I'm going to have to make a little adjustment on this. Now I've got those 2 spares that I made, the 2 new ones that I made up, and you'd think, well, you just go get one of those and stick in there, but these are all so close to the same length on this shank that it wouldn't have made any difference. That nut goes up against the face of the frame, the bracket this mounts into. You can adjust it in and out with the threads on here. Well, like I said, all 3 of the other ones adjusted just fine, but this one stuck out too far, almost a 1/2 inch too far. Now, I can't take the nut off because you've got to have something for that bolt to seat up against on that frame. I could thin that nut down a little bit more and that wouldn't hurt anything, but it wouldn't give me what I need. So there's a couple options that I can do on this. There's 3 things I can do on this. One of them is I could take this roller apart and machine down this little flange that separates the 2 bearings apart, but that really wouldn't work because that only give me about a 1/16 of an inch, and I need almost a 1/2 inch. So the other 2 options are to turn this eccentric back farther on this shank. That would give me what I needed, but then I've got to set the 4-jaw chuck in here and center this eccentric because it's already cut. Or I can take a tap and tap this shank of this bolt to move this bolt in farther along that shank. And that may be what I do. I don't know. I still haven't decided. Now the other thing I could do is I got extra bolts. I could go ahead and make up another bolt, but I don't really want to do that either. I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and thread this back. That's a 1/2 inch by 13 thread, and I think I'll just thread that back. Well, I think I got that fixed. I turned that shank down a little bit so that it'd be easier to run the tap on there, and I was glad I did because that thing wanted to spin in the chuck when I had it chucked up there anyway. And so anyway, I'll have to loosen that bearing up a little bit on there. But anyway, I got that in quite a ways, and then I went ahead and took that nut and turned a little bit off of it, some more off of it, and that's how you adjust the depth of this roller, this guide in and out, is by screwing that nut in. So I can screw the nut out to push this out, and I couldn't get it in any farther to get it in, but it should work now. That give me enough room that it should work now. If it don't, well, I always think it should have. So when I was putting these guide rollers on, I noticed that the rear guide roller on the right side didn't come anywhere close to the back of the blade. You don't want these to touch the blade. Ideally, if a blade is sharpened, a good sharp blade, and the tooth set on it, the pitch of the teeth, or the set of the teeth is correct on it, the blade will actually pull itself through the wood, and you just run the mill to keep up with the blade. Once the blade starts getting dull, it starts getting forced into the wood and cutting, and then that's when it goes back and runs up against these rear guide rollers. And I try to keep that from happening, but obviously I get to pushing the blades a little bit beyond where I should, and let them cut a little longer than I should on them, and then they get back against those rollers. I try to watch the rollers, and when they start rolling, when they start turning, these rear guide rollers here, rear bearings here, when they start turning, then I back off on my feed rate on the mill. So when you set these rollers up, whether it's the ones that go flat that the blades ride on up and down, or the ones that they go up against on the back, the roller shouldn't contact, the guide shouldn't contact the blade. You set them up so that they don't touch the blade. Well, I got to noticing that the ones on the back, or the back roller on the right side, this one, it was quite a ways away from the blade. Oh, it would have to move back a long ways to get to it. Well, as it starts moving back that far, the blade's going to start deflecting, and it's going to start cutting either up or down or something like that. So anyway, it was almost a quarter of an inch away from it, and ideally you want it the thickness of a piece of paper, maybe a little bit more on the back ones. And just like this top roller, where I thought I could adjust the bracket that it mounted in back and forth a little bit to get some adjustment on that, I thought I could adjust that bracket that this back roller attaches to, but it doesn't adjust back and forth. So I decided I would make a sleeve just to fit over that roller, to fit over that bearing, just to make up that difference. It's the only way I can figure out to make a good setup on that roller so that it's set close enough to that blade that the blade doesn't push back too far, but still doesn't contact the blade when it's running normally. Of course, my first thought was to use this piece first piece that I milled out, that I machined out for my guide rollers when I was making the new guide rollers, and I immediately discounted that because that pocket in there is the first one I did, and that pocket is way too big. This guide roller is just sloppy in there. Well, I dug out another piece, and this one is actually closer to the finish size that I wanted anyway. I only needed that to be about a quarter of an inch, and that makes that about that size. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and face this off and try punching a hole in there and see how close I can get it to 30 millimeters. I want it just a little bit tight so that I can heat this up or whatever and slide it right down on that bearing. And I was looking for some other material to use. I've got some of this, I don't know, what is it, 12L14 or whatever it is, the leaded steel that's supposed to be easy to machine. I bought a bunch of drops from a place down in Washington somewhere, had them sent me up a flat rate box of it here several years ago. A problem with that is it has a tendency to rust, and this is going to be outside exposed to the weather, so I guess it's going to rust. I'll have to see what I can do about that, keep it oiled up or something, glue it or something. I was looking for something else I've got to use, and the only other things I've got are some pins that I took out of an old excavator that I was tearing apart, and I'm afraid those pins are probably harder than the hubs of hell, and I don't really want to tackle them right now. We got that hole roughed out, and I figured it was time to start checking it. It was getting pretty close. So I checked it with my calipers, and I don't remember what I got on it, 2779 or something like that, 2780, 2777. So these haven't proven to be too accurate on an inside hole, because there's a little bit of a face on here, so they're not going to be made up with a round surface. I did get a set of these telescoping hole gauges. I decided I'd give them a try, and I stuck that in there, and I was going to get the micrometer and practice doing it the real precision way. And I got to looking through my stuff, and I realized I didn't have a micrometer. The 30 millimeters is 1.1, almost 1.2 inches, and my micrometers, I've got a 0 to 1 inch micrometer and a 2 to 3 inch micrometer, but I don't have a 1 to 2 inch micrometer. So that didn't work quite the way I expected, but I've run this through there a whole bunch of times now, and I'm getting pretty uniform 2774. So that's probably pretty close. Now we want is 30 millimeters, so I still have 2 millimeters to go. So I will go ahead and see if I can't come up to that. Keep using that hole gauge, and I turned the speed up to the highest speed I've ever used on there. I turned it up to 600 RPM, and that's working out pretty good. It gives me a good finish on this stuff, which I was having a hard time getting a good finish on this soft steel. Anyway, that's a pretty nice finish in there on that. Oh, I might even work my nerve up to try it a little higher here one of these days. So I'm not making any bets on this yet, but I did work this and get it a lot closer. I did use my dials and stuff and get everything a lot closer this time. This is what I come up with by using the dial and setting my carriage, my cross slide. Get it 2998, 2999. Digital calipers aren't exactly the most accurate way to do that, but it worked out. Since I don't have a micrometer, a 2-inch micrometer, I couldn't use that. This is what I've got, is that hole is just it's not a slide fit or slip fit, it's just almost, it'll just be a light press fit in there, and that's just what I wanted. That's just perfect. Well, I got to figure out how much I got to take off the OD of this now. That's a little bit bigger than what I need. It's close, but all I need is just a little bit of a collar on there, just a little bit. So anyway, I'll figure out how much I need to take off of that for the OD. Keep figuring on this and keep working on it until I either screw something up totally or until I get it satisfactory. Okay, there's the collar for that bearing, that guide roller. No, that was just a press fit on there when that was on the lathe, and it was warm. The ring was still warm, so hopefully that'll be a press fit in there, and that'll stay on now that it's cool. Well, let it cool off some more, but when it's cool, that should stay on. That bearing should stay on there pretty good. Well, I've got that turned down to a thickness that just a little bit wider than the bearing there, and that should give it a little better clearance on that behind that bandsaw blade. Let's see how it works. Yep. See, I can't get it in there. I can't get it in there now. It just, so it'll press in. That's just what I wanted. Well, I heat this ring up a little bit, and it should just drop right down over that and shrink right down on that bearing, and that should be perfect. That's what I wanted. Cool. I took this collar down to the shop, found a little container that I put it in, a metal container, and then I put some engine oil in it to cover this thing and stuck it on the wood stove for 2 or 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours I guess. I don't think the stove got hot enough to do that. I was trying to see if I could impregnate this ring here, this collar, with some engine oil to keep it from rusting. I bought some yellow cedar firewood from a guy that was burning the stove, and that stuff doesn't burn very good, so I'm not sure I got that hot enough to do what I was hoping to do on it. It's not hot enough to slip this bearing in there right now, just to slip fit, so I'm going to try to heat that up with the heat gun for a little while and see if I can't get that bearing just to slip right in there. Okay, that worked like a champ. I don't know, I'm probably imagining things, but I swear that I could see that ring growing when I was heating that up. Once that cools off, it should clamp down pretty tight on that bearing to keep it from that collar from spinning on the bearing race. So I think that's a finished job there. Now I can mount that bearing up on the mill once I get it going again. Beautiful day today. Clear blue sky and sunshine. Well, we had about 20 minutes of sunshine here, but it's clear blue sky. Just beautiful, nice and dry for a change. It's been wet for months and chilly, so you'd think it'd be an ideal day to work on the bandsaw mill here and get those guides put back on there. There's guide rollers put back on there and get that set up. But I got a couple of problems there with that. One is the belts were wore out on it, and I ordered new belts for it. They should be here tomorrow. I've got to have the belts on it to start the motor up to use the hydraulics, because I need a blade on there to adjust those guide rollers, make sure they're in the right spot and stuff, and so I need the hydraulics on there for the blade tension to do that. The other thing is, it's just too damn cold. Like, it was 6 degrees here this morning. It's warmed up to 12 now, and it's 3 o'clock, 2:30 in the afternoon. I just don't tolerate that cold like I used to. I got staph infection on my leg a few years ago when we were over in Paris and spent 10 days in the hospital over there, and since I got out I just don't have the stamina and the cold tolerance that I used to have. So anyway, it's just too damn cold to work on that with my fingers out there, although I have been working outside all day. We were gone for a week down to Seattle. Before we left, it had just been cold and rainy here, heavy rain and temperatures in the mid 30s to upper 30s. The day before we left, it cooled off and it started snowing, and the morning we left, we had 8 inches of fresh snow here on the ground. Well, it snowed while we were gone. We came back and there was about 2 feet of snow in the driveway here. So the first thing I had to do when we got back in the afternoon off the jet was get the skid steer going and get the driveway cleaned out. Of course, that took longer than it should have, because one of the tires went flat on me and I had to go dig out another tire and change it. And so anyway, we got that cleaned up so we could get up and down the driveway and get in and out of the place. And then I noticed that the water was froze up. Well, we found out on the way down from Juneau that the power had been out for a while here in town, so I don't know whether that had anything to do with it or not. The heat tapes went out and it was cold. It was a blizzard when we got here, snowing and blowing and cold. Well, anyway, the water wasn't working, so I spent yesterday troubleshooting that, figuring that out. Spent the day today working on that. I got the water running, and then it got cold. It's supposed to get down below 0 here, and with the highs only up above 6 or so in the daytime for the next week or two. So we gathered up what snow we had and banked it around the house, help hold some of the heat in, help keep the cold out of there anyway. That house is anywhere from, or the cabin there is anywhere from a foot to 2 feet above the ground, depending on the slope there where it's at. The floor is insulated, but that cold air still gets underneath there and it makes that floor cold. So that should help keep the cold out from underneath the house and hopefully hold a little more heat and keep the floor a little warmer. Anyway, I don't know. I'm not going to be doing much outside here, I don't think. Even the shop, I got some stuff I could get in there and start working on that Volkswagen engine for that other sawmill, for the Multiple Dimension sawmill. But that's out in the outer portion of the shop, and it's still cold out there. And even the shop, I'm only able to get it up to about 45 or 50 degrees, so probably not much work being done in there. So we got about a, I don't know what it is, 800 or 900 gallon tank, plastic tank behind the cabin here. We catch water off the roof in the rain, and I never have any problem with it running dry, except this time of the year when it's like this. When it gets like this, tank will freeze up from the outside towards the center, and then we'll run out of water then if it's dry for a long period of time, because a lot of the water is frozen. I haven't had any trouble with it freezing up like it did today or yesterday. And then we got up there at the house, we've got a 10,000 gallon or 12,000 gallon water tank there. We do the same thing, catch water off the roof there and down into the tank. And that sometimes will freeze up in the winter, even though 2/3 of that is buried in the ground. A third of it is exposed to the air, and it's an aluminum tank, so aluminum transfers the cold in there pretty good, and that tank is frozen up solid. I've got heat tapes and stuff in it now on the lines to keep it from freezing up, and got them insulated. And I've got a tank heater in there, but my outside outlet there in the basement, I had it daisy chained from a GFCI outlet inside the basement. And hey, you guys, careful now, in the basement, and I think the GFCI portion of it must have burned out in that outlet, so I've got to go work on that so I can get that outside outlet working, get that tank heater going up there. So we just do laundry up there, and then the showers and stuff are out of that water, so it's nice to have it running. Otherwise we have to start going to town, go to the laundromat and stuff. Anyway, that's tomorrow's project, I guess, is getting that set up, getting that fixed up. So no working on the Mighty Mite or the Multiple Dimension here for a day or two.